The bell rang at Harper's Diner as a group of teenage boys laughed after basketball practice. Then the door opened again. A police officer walked in, anger still burning from a fight outside. One laugh was all it took. In front of everyone, he crossed the room and slapped Ethan across the face. The diner went silent, not because it was right, but because fear had taught them to look away. That moment would change everything. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, comment Amen and please subscribe for more stories of courage, loyalty, and quiet heroes. Autumn pressed a pale chill against Pine Hollow, the kind that slipped through diner windows and settled into bones, carrying the smell of wet leaves, hot grease, and a town that learned long ago how to hold its breath. Ethan Miller sat frozen in the vinyl booth, his back straight, shoulders squared by habit from basketball drills, though nothing had prepared him for the heat blooming across his left cheek. The sting pulsed in time with his heartbeat, a bright, humiliating throb that made the world feel too close. Ethan was 15, tall for his age, broad-shouldered with the unfinished strength of a boy still growing into himself. His hair, light brown and always falling into his eyes, had been flattened by the sudden snap of his head when the slap landed. He tasted copper at the corner of his mouth and kept his jaw clenched, not from defiance, but because crying felt like giving something away he could never get back. Across from him, his friends, both white boys from the same school, faces still flushed from practice, sat rigid, eyes wide, hands curled tight under the table. They had come in laughing, backpacks shoved at their feet, joking about missed shots and a coach who yelled too much. That laughter now felt like a crime scene. Officer Grant Harlow stood over them, boots planted wide, posture loose with practiced dominance. Harlow was in his late 30s, thick-necked, with a jaw like it had been carved from stone and a permanent shadow of dark stubble that made him look unshaven even at noon. His eyes were pale and flat, the kind that skimmed over people instead of seeing them. Years on the force, and a reputation for keeping order, had sharpened his temper into something brittle. Earlier that evening, a traffic stop had gone badly for him, and he carried the residue of that anger like static, discharging it the moment he heard a boy laugh when he walked in. "You think this is funny?" Harlow had said, his voice calm in the way that came right before violence. Ethan had barely opened his mouth to answer before the slap cracked through the diner, loud as a dropped plate. Now Harlow's lips curled, not quite a smile. "Next time," he said quietly, leaning in close enough that Ethan could smell stale coffee and aftershave. "You remember who runs this town." Behind the counter, Megan Harper forced herself to move. Megan was in her early 40s, tall and lean, her blonde hair pulled back in a low ponytail that always came loose during the dinner rush. She wore the same blue apron she had worn for years, stained and familiar, a kind of armor. Her hands trembled as she set down a coffee pot, but her spine straightened as she stepped forward. "That's assault," she said, voice steady despite the shake in her fingers. "He's a minor." Megan's eyes flicked up toward the small black dome mounted in the corner above the pie case. The camera was new, installed after a break-in last month, and its red light blinked patiently, indifferent to fear. "And it's all on camera." A ripple moved through the diner. A man at the counter stared into his mug like it held answers. A woman slid a few bills under her plate and stood, purse clutched tight, not meeting anyone's eyes. Chairs scraped softly as two customers left, the bell above the door chiming too brightly for the moment. Silence returned, thicker than before. Harlow glanced at the camera, something flickering behind his eyes before his face hardened again. "Careful," he said to Megan, his tone polite in the way threats often were. "Those systems can be unreliable." He stepped back, straightened his uniform, and turned toward the door, leaving behind a room full of people who exhaled only after he was gone. Ethan stayed still, his hands flat on the table, fingers numb. His mother, Sarah Miller, burst through the door seconds later, breathless, having been called by one of the boys who'd slipped outside. Sarah was a nurse at the local clinic, slim and strong, with auburn hair cut just past her shoulders and eyes that missed nothing. She crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside Ethan, cupping his face gently, professional instinct already assessing swelling and alignment. "Does it hurt to open your mouth?" she asked softly. Ethan nodded once, then shook his head, not trusting his voice. Megan brought an ice pack wrapped in a towel, her jaw set. "I told him it's on camera," she said. Sarah pressed the cold to Ethan's cheek, her hand warm and steady against his neck. She looked around at the bowed heads, the averted eyes, and something settled in her chest. An old, familiar ache she'd felt watching patients flinch at raised voices. Ethan followed her gaze and understood then what hurt more than the slap. The bruise would fade. The silence would not, unless someone broke it. Morning light slid across Pine Hollow in the thin bands of gray and gold, the air sharp with frost and the promise of winter edging closer, as Harper's Diner unlocked its door to a day that already felt heavier than it should have. Luke Bennett stepped inside quietly, the bell chiming once above him, then stilled as his German shepherd paused at the threshold. Rex was 5 years old, black and tan with a classic saddle coat, lean and powerful without bulk, the kind of dog whose stillness carried intention. His ears rose like antennae, nose lifting as if he were tasting the air for something unseen. Luke rested a hand briefly on the dog's collar, a grounding touch learned from years of moving through danger together. Luke himself looked like a man who belonged outdoors, mid-30s, tall, broad through the shoulders, with the compact strength of someone who trained every day, even when no one was watching. His hair was cropped close, military neat, and a short beard shadowed a jawline etched by old scars and older restraint. The lines at the corners of his eyes suggested a man who had learned to watch before he spoke, to measure rooms the way others measured weather. He wore a plain jacket, jeans, and boots scuffed by miles, nothing that announced his past, though his posture did. Megan Harper glanced up from behind the counter and felt a strange, irrational relief at the sight of him, as if calm had just walked in on 4 legs and 2. Luke nodded once to her, not smiling, his eyes already tracking the room. He saw the empty booths where people had fled the night before, the way chairs had been pushed back unevenly, the faint smear on the window near Ethan's table that had been hastily wiped. Rex's low, almost inaudible rumble drew Luke's gaze to the booth by the window. Ethan Miller sat there with his mother Sarah, an ice pack resting against his cheek. The bruise had darkened overnight, blooming from red to a deep, ugly purple. Ethan tried to sit tall, but his shoulders were tight, his eyes flicking toward the door each time the bell chimed for a customer. Sarah Miller was composed in the way nurses often were under pressure. Slender, steady, auburn hair pulled back in a practical knot, eyes sharp with vigilance. She wore scrubs under a heavy sweater, having come straight from a night shift she barely remembered. Her hand rested on Ethan's forearm, thumb moving in small, repetitive circles meant to soothe both of them. Luke took in the scene without staring, a habit forged by years of observing people who didn't want to be observed. He felt Rex lean subtly into his leg, a silent confirmation. Megan set a mug on the counter, then looked up at Luke again as he approached. "Coffee?" she asked, voice careful. Luke shook his head once. "I'm fine." He glanced toward the corner where the camera dome blinked. "You didn't touch anything?" Megan swallowed. "No, I haven't." Luke nodded, approval unspoken. "Don't," he said simply, the word carrying more weight than its single syllable deserved. Megan exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Luke moved to the booth across from Ethan and Sarah, keeping a respectful distance. "I'm Luke," he said, voice low and even. "That's Rex." Rex sat immediately, posture alert but controlled, amber eyes never leaving Ethan, not with threat, but with focus. Ethan met Luke's gaze for the first time since the incident and felt something in his chest ease. Not safety, not yet, but the absence of judgment. "Ethan," he said, "this is my mom." Sarah studied Luke's face, reading the way he held himself, the calm that didn't ask for permission. "Thank you for coming," she said, unsure why she was thanking him at all. Luke's eyes flicked briefly to the bruise. "I didn't come for breakfast," he replied. Outside, a patrol car rolled past the diner at a crawl. Rex's ears twitched, body tensing by a fraction. Luke's hand dropped to the dog's shoulder, steady pressure, grounding both of them. "He's been circling the school," Ethan said quietly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Just driving slow, watching." Luke didn't react outwardly, but something hardened behind his eyes. "Has he spoken to you again?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." Luke nodded. "Good." He turned to Megan. "If anyone asks about your system," he said, "you ask for a warrant." Megan's lips pressed into a thin line. "They already hinted," she admitted. Luke's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "They always do." Sarah leaned forward. "Who are you?" she asked, not unkindly. Luke considered her for a beat. "I'm on leave," he said, "and I don't like bullies." Rex rose suddenly and moved closer to Ethan, sitting at his side as if by instinct. Ethan felt the warmth of the dog through his jacket, and for the first time since last night let his shoulders drop. Outside, the patrol car moved on. Luke watched it go, already mapping what came next, but for now he stayed seated, saying nothing more, letting presence do the work words could not. Before dawn, Pine Hollow lay under a thin crust of frost, the sky a dull slate that made the town feel unfinished, as if morning itself were hesitating to arrive. Megan Harper unlocked the back door of her diner with numb fingers and felt the wrongness immediately. The air too still, the smell of dust and exposed wiring sharp where warm coffee should have been. She stepped inside and stopped short. The small, black camera dome that had blinked faithfully over the pie case was gone, torn clean from its mount. Wires dangled from the ceiling like pale veins, ends frayed and stripped, screws scattered across the floor. Megan's breath caught in her chest. She was a tall woman, but in that moment she felt folded inward, her shoulders rounding as she took in the quiet violence of it. This wasn't vandalism, it was a message. Someone had come in knowing exactly what they wanted, knowing when the street would be empty, knowing no one would stop them. She pressed a hand to the counter to steady herself, then pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Luke Bennett's number. Across town, Luke was already awake. He slept lightly, a habit burned into him by years when dawn often meant movement, not rest. Rex lay at the foot of the bed, a compact shadow of muscle and fur, breathing slow until the faint whine of a distant engine cut through the quiet. The German shepherd's head lifted instantly, ears erect, body coiling without a sound. Rex was 5, his muzzle just beginning to silver at the edges, eyes sharp and intelligent. He had learned the difference between ordinary noise and intent, and this crawling patrol sound was not ordinary. Luke swung his legs over the side of the bed and rested a hand on Rex's back. "Easy," he murmured, though his own jaw tightened as blue light washed briefly across the wall. Outside, a patrol car rolled past his house at a deliberate crawl, tires crunching softly on gravel. Luke stood at the window long enough to note the timing, the speed, the way the vehicle paused just a beat too long before moving on. He didn't look angry. Anger wasted energy. He looked focused. His phone buzzed in his hand. Megan's name. "They took it," she said when he answered, her voice low but steady. "Camera, recorder, everything." Luke closed his eyes for a second, cataloging the implications. "Did they force entry?" "No," Megan replied. "Lock's intact." Luke nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "I'm coming by," he said. "Don't touch anything." When he arrived minutes later, Rex at his side, the diner felt hollowed out. Luke crouched beneath the torn mount, eyes tracing the cut wires, the careful way insulation had been stripped. "This was done by someone who's done it before," he said quietly. Megan wrapped her arms around herself. "I knew it," she whispered. Luke straightened. "You still have what you sent yesterday?" Megan nodded. "On my phone, and a backup at home." "Good," Luke said. "Keep it offline." Outside, the town woke slowly, oblivious. At Pine Hollow High that afternoon, Ethan Miller felt the weight of eyes he couldn't see. He was taller than most boys his age, shoulders filling out his hoodie, but he moved through the hallway with a carefulness that hadn't been there before. When the final bell rang, he stepped onto the sidewalk with his backpack slung high and felt it immediately. The presence behind him, not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. A patrol car eased along the curb, matching his pace. Officer Grant Harlow sat behind the wheel, broad hands resting casually on it, face expressionless behind dark lenses. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Ethan kept walking, heart thudding, eyes forward. At home, Sarah Miller watched from the porch, tall and still, auburn hair pulled back, jaw set as the cruiser crept past her son and continued down the street. She caught Ethan at the steps, hands on his shoulders, scanning him the way she did patients after a fall. "Did he stop you?" she asked. Ethan shook his head. Just followed. Sarah swallowed hard and pulled him into a brief, fierce hug. That night, Luke sat at his kitchen table, a map of Pine Hollow spread before him, a legal pad filled with notes. Rex lay nearby, head up, tracking every sound beyond the walls. Each time headlights passed, the dog's low growl vibrated the room, a warning rather than fear. Luke listened to it, to the town's rhythms, to the way intimidation tried to wear people down without leaving marks. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Megan, to Sarah, to anyone who had been brave enough to speak. Keep documenting. Keep times. Keep plates. Don't engage. When he finally stood and looked out into the dark, Luke didn't see a quiet town. He saw a pattern. And patterns, he knew, could be broken. Rain fell hard that night, drumming against Pine Hollow in uneven bursts that turned streets into mirrors and erased the edges of things, as if the town itself were trying to pretend nothing solid existed. Luke Bennett was rinsing mud from Rex's paws in the garage when the knock came. 3 soft raps, a pause, then one more. Rex's head snapped up, ears slicing the air, body sliding forward with silent intent. Luke straightened, towel in hand, eyes narrowing not with fear but with calculation. He opened the door to reveal a man standing half in shadow, rain slicking his jacket dark. Deputy Tom Reyes looked younger than Luke expected, late 20s at most, lean and narrow-shouldered, with dark hair plastered to his forehead and a faint mustache that failed to make him look older. His eyes were the giveaway, constantly moving, scanning the street behind him, the kind of eyes that had learned vigilance not as a skill, but as a survival tactic. "I shouldn't be here," Tom said, voice low, words tumbling as if he feared being overheard by the rain itself. Luke stepped aside without a word. Rex moved between them automatically, sitting squarely in front of Luke, chest broad, head level, amber eyes fixed on Tom. The deputy swallowed and forced his hands to remain visible. "I heard about the diner," Tom continued, "and the camera." Luke closed the door behind them, the garage light throwing stark shadows across the concrete. "You're soaked," he said evenly. "Talk." Tom rubbed his palms against his jeans, a nervous habit worn smooth. "They think the footage is gone," he said. "But it isn't. Or it wasn't." He took a breath, shoulders lifting, then sagging. When Megan's system uploaded, it passed through a temporary internal buffer. Department servers, routine, before it was flagged. Luke said nothing. His silence a pressure Tom felt keenly. "I copied it," Tom went on, faster now. "Not because I'm brave, because I couldn't sleep, because I saw his face when he hit the kid." He glanced at Rex, who did not move. "They erased the primary file last night, took the hardware, but I kept a copy." Tom reached inside his jacket and pulled out a small, weatherproof drive, clutched so tight his knuckles had gone white. His hand trembled as he extended it. "If they find out—" Luke cut him off gently. "They won't," he said. He took the drive and slipped it into a pocket without looking at it, a practiced motion that told Tom this wasn't Luke's first time carrying something dangerous close to his body. "Who else knows?" Tom shook his head. No one. And that's the problem. There's a group, 3, maybe 4, inside the department. They clean things, make reports disappear. Harlow's just the hammer. His voice dropped. Behind them is Clayton Pierce. Luke's eyes flickered. The developer, he said. Tom nodded. Owns half the town on paper. Donates to everything. Youth sports, police fundraisers. He calls. Things happen. Rain hammered the roof harder, as if punctuating the name. Rex shifted, standing now, placing his body fully between Tom and Luke, tail low, posture protective but not aggressive. Tom noticed and breathed through his fear, grounding himself. I'm not like them, he said quietly, more plea than statement. I don't belong to that pack. Luke studied him then, really studied him. The faint bruise along Tom's jaw poorly concealed, the way his shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow that never came, the tremor that had nothing to do with the cold. Why now? Luke asked. Tom laughed once, bitter. Because the kid didn't talk back, because his mom stood there anyway, because you showed up. He looked up, eyes bright with something like hope. They're escalating. Following him, taking cameras. That's how it starts. Luke nodded. You understand the risk, he said. If you're in, you're in. Tom nodded again, rainwater dripping from his hair onto the concrete. I know. Luke moved to the table and pulled a laptop closer, not opening it yet. You leave separately, he said. Different route, different time. Tom hesitated. What if they watch me? Luke met his gaze. Then you don't come back, he said. You disappear for a while. Tom swallowed. Thank you, he said, the words catching. Rex stepped forward then, sniffed Tom's hand once and withdrew, as if granting a provisional trust. Luke opened the door and watched Tom vanish into the rain, a solitary figure moving against the storm. When the door closed, Luke rested a hand on Rex's head. We've got a pattern now, he murmured. Rex leaned into the touch, steady and present, a living barrier against a town that had decided fear was easier than truth. Fear has a smell, Luke Bennett had learned, long before Pine Hollow taught him its version of the lesson. It was metallic and sharp, the kind that clung to skin and fabric and followed people home. The call came just after dusk. Luke answered on the first ring, Rex already on his feet, nails whispering against the kitchen tile. It's Tom, Megan said, her voice thin as glass. They found him in the south lot. Ambulance took him. Luke was out the door before the sentence finished, rain misting his jacket, Rex at his side like a shadow with a heartbeat. The south lot sat behind a shuttered hardware store, sodium lights flickering, asphalt slick with oil and rain. Tom Reyes lay on a stretcher under harsh white light, face swollen, a dark bruise blooming along his ribs where a boot had landed. He was conscious, eyes unfocused but stubbornly open. Tom looked smaller now, his lean frame folded inward, the confidence he never had stripped even further away. They didn't ask, he whispered when Luke leaned close. Just made sure I knew. Luke squeezed his shoulder once, firm, grounding, and straightened as the paramedic rolled Tom away. Sirens receded, leaving behind the smell Luke knew too well. By morning, the town was buzzing without speaking. People lowered their voices at the coffee counter. A clerk taped a closed sign to a window without explanation. The rumor traveled faster than facts. Talk, and you bleed. Remember, and you pay. Sarah Miller felt it when she walked Ethan to school, her long stride purposeful, auburn hair braided tight down her back like armor. She was tall and slender, her posture straight with the fatigue of someone who'd learned to stand through long nights, and she kept her hand on Ethan's shoulder until the bell rang. Ethan felt watched the whole way, felt the hush settle around him like fog. Yet something else threaded through the fear now, a thin line of resolve. He had seen Luke stand in the rain without flinching. He had seen Megan refuse to bow. Adults could choose sides. Luke turned his kitchen into a quiet war room. He moved with the economy of a man who respected time, setting his laptop beside a stack of legal pads, sliding a small encrypted drive from his pocket like it was a blade he'd carried for years. Rex lay near the door, head up, tracking every sound, his 5-year-old body taut and ready, ears swiveling with purpose. Luke copied the footage Tom had saved, then copied it again, verifying checksums, naming files with dates and locations, the way he had named patrol routes once. He encrypted each copy, layered keys, stored them apart. When he finished, he leaned back and closed his eyes for a count of 5, letting the discipline steady his breathing. Then he followed the money. Clayton Pierce did not hide. He didn't have to. Luke pulled public records, donation lists, zoning approvals, shell companies that shared an accountant or a mailing address. Pierce was in his late 50s, silver hair always immaculate in press photos, a smile that suggested generosity without warmth. He built condos where fields had been, sponsored youth leagues, cut ribbons with mayors. Luke mapped it all, line by line, watching the web tighten. Police fundraisers that coincided with favorable permits. Community grants routed through nonprofits chaired by Pierce's allies. A pattern emerged as clean as it was ugly. Late afternoon brought a knock. Megan stood on the porch, shoulders squared, blonde hair escaping its tie, apron still on like she hadn't known how to take it off. "They came by again," she said. "Asked about permits, smiled while they did it." Luke nodded. "Document everything," he said. "Times, names." She did. As she turned to leave, Rex stepped forward and sat at her feet, gaze steady. Megan exhaled, a surprised laugh slipping free. "Good dog," she said, and meant thank you. That evening, Luke met Sarah and Ethan at the diner after closing. The place felt different now, quieter, but not empty. Luke laid out what he could without naming names. Sarah listened with a nurse's focus, chin lifted, questions precise. Ethan watched Luke's hands as he spoke, the way they stayed calm even when the words were not. "They want us afraid," Luke said. "Fear is leverage." Ethan nodded, then surprised himself by speaking. "It doesn't smell as strong anymore," he said. Luke looked at him, understanding. Outside, a patrol car rolled past and didn't slow. Rex's growl faded into a watchful silence. The town still breathed fear, but Luke had found its source, and once you could name a thing, you could plan to end it. Before dawn, Pine Hollow held its breath. Fog lay low over the streets, softening edges and swallowing sound as if the town itself were bracing for impact. Luke Bennett watched from the far end of the block, engine off, Rex seated upright in the passenger seat, his breath steady, eyes fixed on the dark silhouette of the police station. Luke's face was calm, the calm that came from preparation rather than hope. He wore a plain jacket zipped to the collar, beard trimmed close, jaw set with the quiet resolve of a man who had learned to wait for the precise moment. When the first unmarked vehicle rolled into position without lights or sirens, he exhaled once and did not move. More followed, gliding into place like chess pieces. No radios crackled, no doors slammed. The absence of noise felt deliberate, surgical. Rex's ears tilted, catching movement before Luke saw it, then settled again, disciplined and still. At exactly 5:42 a.m., the station doors opened. Officer Grant Harlow stepped out, shoulders hunched against the cold, uniform immaculate, the bruise of arrogance still clinging to him like cologne. He paused when he noticed the vehicles, his hand drifting toward his belt out of habit. "Police," a voice said from the fog, calm and unmistakable. "Hands where we can see them." Harlow froze. For a heartbeat, Luke wondered if the man would run. He didn't. He lifted his hand slowly, disbelief tightening his mouth as cuffs clicked shut around his wrists. Harlow's face drained of color, his eyes darting, searching for allies who did not appear. Inside the station, lights snapped on as agents moved with quiet efficiency. The chief, Robert Kane, tall and silver-haired, a man who wore authority like a tailored suit, was escorted from his office, expression carefully blank. Kane had always been polished, a leader shaped by decades of navigating politics rather than streets. He did not protest as he was read his rights. He simply adjusted his tie, as if decorum might still save him. Across town, Clayton Pierce's glass-front office glowed briefly as agents entered and sealed it. Pierce himself was absent, but his world was not. File cabinets were opened, computers disconnected. The illusion of permanence cracked. By the time the sun crested the tree line, Harper's Diner unlocked its doors. Megan Harper stood behind the counter, apron freshly washed, hair pulled back with care. She moved with a steadiness that surprised even her, setting cups down, flipping the sign to open. Customers arrived quietly at first, then, in a trickle, eyes meeting without dropping away. There were no whispers, no hurried exits, just the scrape of chairs and the murmur of coffee poured. Sarah Miller arrived with Ethan just after 7. She stood tall, shoulders back, auburn hair braided neatly, eyes alert but unflinching. Ethan walked beside her. His bruise faded to yellow at the edges, his stride less guarded. When he looked through the window and saw Luke's truck parked across the street, Rex visible through the glass, he felt a weight lift he hadn't known how to name. Luke entered last, Rex at heel. The dog's presence drew glances, respectful, curious, but no fear. Megan met Luke's gaze and nodded once. "Morning," she said. "It's a good one." Luke returned the nod. "It is." He took a seat by the window, back to the wall, habit again, but his shoulders eased. Rex lay at his feet, head on pause, watchful but relaxed. Outside, there were no sirens, no spectacle, just the ordinary sound of a town waking up to a different truth. A man in a windbreaker read the paper and shook his head slowly, then smiled at no one in particular. A waitress refilled cups without flinching at footsteps behind her. Ethan slid into a booth and felt something settle in his chest. Not victory, but relief. "They're really gone?" he asked quietly. Sarah squeezed his hand. "They're being held accountable," she said, choosing the words carefully, like bandages applied with intention. Luke listened without interrupting, eyes on the street, noting the way the light changed as the fog burned off. He had sent the last file hours earlier, triple-checked and mirrored, the way he had learned to do when failure meant lives. He did not feel triumphant. He felt complete. Megan approached with a plate she hadn't planned to make. "On the house," she said, setting it down in front of Luke. He shook his head, then smiled despite himself. "Thank you," he said. Outside, a patrol car passed at normal speed and did not slow. Rex lifted his head, assessed, then rested it again. The town exhaled. The day continued. And for the first time in a long while, justice arrived without announcing itself, doing the work quietly, the way it always should have. Morning returned to Pine Hollow with a softer light than it had known in weeks, the sun slipping between clouds like a promise kept quietly. Harper's Diner smelled of fresh coffee and warm bread, the kind of ordinary comfort that had once felt fragile. Ethan Miller stepped inside beside his mother, Sarah, the bell above the door chiming with a sound that no longer made his shoulders tighten. Sarah walked tall, as she always did, slender and composed, auburn hair gathered neatly at the nape of her neck, her posture reflecting the discipline of years spent steadying others through pain. She scanned the room with a nurse's instinct, then relaxed when she saw familiar faces holding their gaze instead of dropping it. Ethan followed her lead. He was still growing into himself. Broad shoulders under a worn hoodie, hair falling into his eyes, but something in his stance had shifted. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a faint yellow shadow, no longer the first thing people saw when they looked at him. Megan Harper stood on a chair near the counter, arms lifted as she tightened the final screw on a new camera mount. She moved with careful confidence, blonde hair escaping its tie as she worked, jaw set not with defiance but with certainty. When she finished, she climbed down, wiped her hands on her apron, and glanced up at the blinking red light. "There," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "Let it watch." A small ripple of approval moved through the diner. Nods, murmured greetings, the scrape of chairs pulled closer instead of away. At a corner table, Deputy Tom Reyes sat with his back to the wall, hands wrapped around a mug he hadn't touched. He looked different now, thinner somehow. The lines of worry etched deeper around his eyes, but there was a steadiness in him that hadn't been there before. A man in a plain jacket sat across from him, broad-shouldered with close-cropped hair and a calm, professional air. His name was Mark Ellison, a federal handler assigned to witness protection, his demeanor unremarkable by design. He spoke quietly, leaning in just enough to be heard without drawing attention. "We'll move you this afternoon," Mark said. "Temporary location first, then longer-term options." Tom nodded, swallowing hard. "I understand." His gaze flicked briefly to Ethan and then to the new camera. "I didn't think it would matter," he said. Mark met his eyes. "It already does." Near the window, Luke Bennett sat with Rex at his feet. Luke wore the same plain jacket he had arrived in days before, his beard trimmed, his expression calm but thoughtful. Rex lay stretched out, black and tan coat catching the light, ears relaxed but attentive, 5 years of discipline allowing him rest without surrendering awareness. Luke's hands rested loosely on his knees, the hands of a man who had carried weight and set it down when the work was done. He watched the room, not for threats now, but for the subtle signs of change. The way people met each other's eyes, the absence of the hush that had once followed every raised voice. Ethan approached hesitantly, then stopped in front of Luke. "You're leaving," he said, not accusing, just stating a fact. Luke nodded. "Soon." Ethan shifted his weight. "Thank you," he said, the words simple and unguarded. Luke smiled just a little. "You stood up," he replied. "That matters." Rex lifted his head and nudged Ethan's hand once, a gentle, solid presence. Ethan smiled despite himself and scratched the dog behind the ear, feeling the steady warmth there. Sarah joined them, offering Luke her hand. "You did right by us," she said. Luke shook it, firm and brief. "You did right by him," he answered, nodding toward Ethan. Outside, Luke's truck waited, packed and ready. He settled the bill despite Megan's protests, then stood, slinging his jacket over his shoulder. The bell chimed as he moved toward the door, Rex rising smoothly to follow. For a moment, Luke paused and looked back at the diner, the new camera, the occupied tables, the quiet strength in the room. Then he opened the door and stepped into the day. The bell rang again behind him. No one flinched. Coffee cups clinked. Conversations continued. Pine Hollow did not return to what it had been. It moved forward, standing taller, having learned that courage once practiced becomes habit. Sometimes the miracle is not thunder or fire from heaven. Sometimes it is quieter, a door that opens, a voice that refuses to stay silent, a heart that chooses to stand when fear says kneel. God often works through ordinary people, a mother who protects, a stranger who steps in, a community that finally lifts its eyes. In our daily lives, we may never face flashing lights or public trials, but we are given small choices every day. To speak truth, to defend the vulnerable, to walk in faith instead of fear. Those choices matter more than we know. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from and what courage means to you. Subscribe for more stories of faith, justice, and quiet miracles. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, and give you strength to stand tall when it matters most.